going to ask each of the panelists to take a couple of minutes to answer or give this question. Based on your experiences, research, and perceptions, what are your thoughts about the core and elective elements of KM? Anyone jump in first?
I'll go ahead and start. In getting involved in KM, it started first with my role at work, some of the things that I was doing. We got involved in developing a call center, and we needed to build a knowledge base. So I got introduced early in 95, 96 to the concepts of having to gather knowledge and put it into a system. As time went on, I ran into some folks. We had Professor Jay Leibowitz come to the FCC, and I met him and discussed knowledge management further, and then finally had the opportunity around 2003 to actually get involved in a knowledge management program at George Washington University. So going into the program, I had almost no knowledge of what knowledge management was about, and the concepts that I did have really were just touching the surface on, what is it what kind of knowledge do you have to capture, and where do you put it? So as we got into the program, of course, the George Washington program focuses on the leadership, organization, technology, and learning model. And within that model, we have over 40 sciences that come into play. And as you start looking at all these sciences, and as you start thinking about knowledge management, you get into thinking about, you've got in that model, you've got the people, the processes, and the technology, and it quickly becomes a very how can I say? There's just many sciences that you have to start learning before you get into an effective knowledge management program. It's not just talking to people and gathering information and putting it into a knowledge base. It gets into I really like to focus on the people aspect of knowledge management, and that just the people aspect itself. One of the three cores, I might say. There's so much activity going on in there as well. You've got to be able to engage people. You've got mentoring going on. You want to collaborate, and you want to get your community practices happening where you get people to get together and begin sharing information and documenting it in systems. And then you get into areas of trust. And then you get into a whole area of sociological aspects of the knowledge management arena, where you just have to work with everybody and all the thinkings of the people. You've got to bring them together and start working as a team. So when we start looking at what kind of a program should we have, we really need to touch on the four pillars, the leadership. You have to bring that aspect into it, the organizational practices, the technology pieces of it, and the learning processes. These all have to be touched upon, I think, within a good program. And that's kind of where I'm going from with this. Do I want to step in?
Sure, I'll try it. In my aspect, I learn by doing. And what I've seen in the art of knowledge management is you do knowledge management. In my aspect, in the academic realm, I'm coming to Kent State for the credentials. I'm already doing knowledge management. What it's doing is it's solidifying the mortar in between the foundation of what I've already got. It's filling in all the little cracks and making it pretty airtight. So as listening to this forum, in the forum that we had at the KM conference over at the Ritz-Carlton this week, to me, my personality and being raised in the military, learn by doing. Show me first and I'll learn better later because the motivation will be there to learn. Experience what I don't know so I can experience what I should know. And that way it sticks.
I'll jump in. I'm Tova Sanders. I wasn't able to talk to a lot of you yesterday, so it's good to meet you. I actually come to this from a unique perspective. I teach in the somewhat unique perspective, the Human and Organizational Learning Program at GW, which is social science-based in our School of Education, actually. And I just took on a similar position at Northeastern University in Boston. So I am fortunate to work with a lot of engineering students, both at the master's and doctoral level, and I have a feeling that's how I was referred to this panel. And I also have master's students in everything from law to education to public service, both at the master's and doctoral level. So I have a pretty dynamic classroom, and to my knowledge, I think I'm the only faculty member who teaches quote-unquote an org learning program on the Foggy Bottom campus. So I'm kind of looking at it, I think when I think about curriculum development, I really look at the gaps that exist for a lot of my students, and one of them is the big picture, and looking at things from a holistic perspective and also from a contextual perspective. I have a lot of students who come in and they want tools. And a lot of times I say, you're not going to walk out of here with a tool. You're going to walk out of here hopefully with a different mindset and a different way of looking at organizations. And of course, when they first come in, they kind of resist that and they say, but how am I going to apply it when I get out? And I'm really excited to see at the end of the course, most students say, I have never looked at organizations in this way before. I've never looked at them from this perspective, and you shifted my perspective, and you know what, I trusted the process and it worked. That being said, I have a lot of students who come out and say they really get the big picture, they get the systems perspective of organizations, they naturally look at things from that perspective, and they say they want the tools. And so my students are really coming in with a real diversity of backgrounds. So when I'm asked to think about the curriculum, even as a faculty member, I sit down and I come up with my syllabus, right? And I look at all the different disciplines, you know, trying to pull it together. I think a lot of times we think about curriculum in a linear way, and in a how can we build on this way, whereas I think having a core and electives are very important. Looking at it from kind of an adult learning perspective, I think you touched on, people are more willing to learn about what they know and what they need to use, and our theories tell us that. And so there are gaps that everybody has. And then there are, of course, that I would say the majority of my students, regardless of the discipline, say it's looking at it from a contextual perspective that's really necessary, and it's looking at it from a systemic perspective. So when I think about kind of the core elements from what I see with my students, a lot of it is, you know, opening their eyes to see the bigger picture. And certainly now, not knowledge management only in organizations, but interorganizational knowledge management, knowledge transfer, and bringing that into the conversation, which is evolving. So part of it, you know, from the core, I think, is the shift of perspectives to look at organizations in that way. But then a lot of students need that practical application and need it specific to their job. But that being a dynamic process of, you don't just start a graduate program and end a graduate program and that stops. You're going to learn about what you're doing at that point. But providing those opportunities long-term as functions change and roles and responsibilities to learn things that you may not be motivated to do because you're not doing it at that time. So from an academic perspective, I look at partnerships. I think that's really important for us to continue that dialogue. I'm lucky to have mostly students who are working full-time. So they bring a lot of that into the classroom and a lot of that in our conversations, but I think what there is a lag time between oftentimes what we're teaching and what's being done, and that conversation needs to happen more often. I think I touched on it a little bit.
So my name is Curvis Grigg. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer for the FBI, and from our perspective, or how I see this, when we look at the core curriculums that would be necessary in a KM discipline, they would come across as what's basic KM and information management. Oftentimes people use those terms, and so one of the things that we found great value is really getting down to what do you mean when you say KM, because that has a different context in the organization in which you're using it. And this issue of information management, how does information flow? For us, it often comes back to defining what the roles and responsibilities are. You really can't do KM in an organization unless you understand change management and communication and awareness. In my role at the organization, I feel like I spend a large majority of my time being a connector, helping people find each other, and then brokering that relationship, and then stepping back, observing and helping them do that. So then when we look into kind of elective type contents and where we would go in the 21st century, we're not going to walk away from devices like this as it comes to knowledge management and just-in-time learning opportunities. So I would explore some of those opportunities. How can we use secure mobility or mobility devices to be able to enhance learning and just-in-time knowledge sharing and information? I would look at the career development and career opportunities that are available in the knowledge management field and in organizations. I think that's evolving. We're seeing more and more knowledge management components growing in organizations and in government, and the Bureau is no small example. I think there's great value in doing case studies and being able to go out there and look at what's being done in effective knowledge management implementations both in private industry, business, and academia. I think students learn very, very well from looking at others and how it was done and doing those lessons learned and analysis. I think another elective type activity would be is how do you measure the value of KM and articulate that back to the different constituencies, both the executives who make the budgetary and strategy decisions, to the mid-level managers who actually have to implement and supervise the people doing that, and then how do you make the KM business case down to the actual knowledge worker. Now I say knowledge worker, we all accept that everyone's a knowledge worker, but you have a different role, so the frontline employees. And I think that's an area that I often see individuals struggling in, and that's making that business case for KM. One of the other things that some folks touched on is leadership. And I think you really can't get away from having some type of curriculum that addresses leadership and how you do that because you are in the role of connector. And then the last thing I would talk about is we spend a lot of time doing collaboration and networking. So a more full understanding of what are the intricacies of networking, how do you really function as a connector, and how do you build those collaboration and communities. That's what we've seen to be effective in our organization for those that are doing well at KM.
Steve Winnicke, good morning. I'm going to turn this upside down for a minute. I think the core content of a KM curriculum would be everything that's not KM. And the electives, instead of going to turn it upside down, the electives would be the KM activities because there's so much diversity in actually applying. You let your electives be allow the diversity, and then the core content would be things like organizational change and development, appreciative inquiry, coaching and mentoring, those soft skills that everybody's going to need, and let the electives create a specialization. Now, the other thing that would have to be in the core curriculum would be introductory material for KM, just an overview. And if you did that first from a business perspective, entrepreneurial perspective, if you went after the introductory KM material first, then if I were in a university, I'd be out peddling that to all of the other schools so that it could immediately become electives in the other schools. So the accounting school and the financial school, et cetera, et cetera. The introductory material would be their electives, and then we would use some of their core material as our core materials. Now, I absolutely do not suggest that we relabel organizational change and development KM. I've been in forums where people have done that, and rebadging only confuses the world. And so that's my thought. It's a little unconventional, but I kind of hit me this morning that would the possibility to consider.
Okay.